Hi everyone, and welcome to the Bare Necessities. I'm Bear, and today we are doing candy making again. I love it. Recently, or not so recently, it depends on when you're watching this, we made some super dark chocolate truffles that were absolutely amazing and super easy. And this one's going to be kind of easy too, not quite as easy as those. This one has 4 ingredients, but it's fairly simple. We are making traditional butterscotch. It's not one of those things that you always need, but when you have it, oh my gosh, it's so good. Now, we're making a chewy caramelly butterscotch versus the harder set kind of crisp butterscotch drops. If you cook butterscotch to where it sets up crisp and crunchy, it's more of a toffee at that point, no longer a butterscotch. Butterscotch is the kind of chewy candy. It was created in the mid 1840s in Britain by a confectioner that had gone to Italy and discovered that their candies, this is his story, or at least the story printed in the newspaper. He had discovered that the candies in Italy tasted so much better than the ones in Britain, and he wanted to fix that. So he came back to the UK and began working on a recipe that eventually became butterscotch. This recipe was printed in the Liverpool Mercury in 1848, I believe, and we're running off of that one. It's fairly simple. I believe I said it's 4 ingredients, and if not, it is 4 whole ingredients. So it's super easy. For the recipe, you're going to need sugar, unsalted butter, molasses, and then salt. Now, okay, so everything is done by weight, but you can also do it volumetrically, and I will break it down that way as well. But there is a note about the molasses. Depending on how dark you like your butterscotch, how rich you like that flavor, how kind of you like that punch in there, you can use whatever molasses you have or molasses you like. I'm going to be using blackstrap, which is not always the most recommended because it does go very dark very fast, but I like that punch. We're going to be using these in Butterscotch Blondies in another episode, and I want it to really be like butterscotch, so we're going to have to do that. You can use just whatever you have. If you want to use light molasses, or I believe it's called grandma's molasses, something like that. I know in the US, at least in the southern US, we have Brer Rabbit, which comes from a very racist story. So I apologize for that. Please don't at me. I understand. Unfortunately, it is the brand name. Yeah. So, but they have lighter molasses, and I've seen 3 or 4 different levels of depth on the flavor, so on the color. I like blackstrap, which is the darkest molasses you can buy. It's basically right before it just turns to unusable tar, or just hard, crunchy molasses candy, which yum, I would eat. It's bitter and I love it. For the recipe, you're going to need, I'm making a quarter batch, so work with me here. You need a pound of granulated sugar, just regular cane sugar, whatever you got. A pound of unsalted butter. Now, all of these are by weight again, and I will break them down. 4 ounces of molasses, and that is by weight. And then about a teaspoon to 2 teaspoons of salt, depending on how salty you like it. The original recipe calls for 14 grams, which is around like 1.5-ish teaspoons, depending. I'm just going to be doing a nice heavy pinch because I like mine a little salty, but there's going to be salt in the later bake, and so I don't want to overdo it. Now, that pound of sugar, that's 16 ounces, which is going to be 2 cups. You can do that by 2 cups. You may have to work with it a little bit. It might be 2 cups and like a tablespoon just to get it quite right. The same for the butter. That's just going to be a full 2 cups, which is 4 sticks, if that's how you go. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. The salt, That's the 1.5 teaspoons. You could just break it down or however much you want to use. Don't do the 1.5 teaspoons if you break it down less than a full batch. Oh my gosh. And then the molasses, it comes out to, I actually wrote it down. It comes out to, volumetrically, it's about a 1/4 cup plus a tablespoon plus 2 teaspoons. If you're using darker molasses, use less. I'm using less, not a huge amount less, but less than what it would break down to, because again, I'm making a 1/4 batch. So I have a 1/4 pound of sugar, which is right about a 1/2 cup. I have a 1/4 pound of butter, which is right about a 1/2 cup. So 1 stick. And then I did 1 ounce of molasses. It would be be right around like 2 tablespoons-ish. Otherwise, I did less than that because I don't want it to be overpowering. I like it, but not, crazy amount. And like I said, a heavy pinch of salt. So let's get started. Of course, you're also going to need a pan. Non-stick is great. Please line it with something, anything at all. Oh my gosh, just line it because it will stick. Foil works really well. Wax paper is great. All right, so let's get the heat going on this pot. Thankfully, it doesn't take too long. So let's go ahead and add our butter and just let that melt. It'll only take a minute. My butter is not room temperature, so it might take a little bit longer. I forgot to actually get it out and let it warm. So we're just gonna let it melt for a minute. In the meantime, what I did is I didn't quite measure. I used the bottom of my pan to decide what size strips of parchment I needed to cut, and I did one that runs the length and one that does the width, so that I have all the sides and the bottom covered, and it just gives me a better chance. And then when the butterscotch is done, we could just lift it out. So, and of course this is the side piece. Right, butter is warming. It's about halfway melted. And just a note, to begin, you only want to melt your butter over about a medium-low heat. If you're doing this on a stove that has a 10-point system, you're looking around a 3-ish. Otherwise, like this, since it goes up to 10, I'm doing 2.5. And you're just trying to get the butter melted. You're not trying to give it any color. You're not even trying to get it to evaporate yet. And my butter is now melted, so I'm gonna go ahead and add my sugar. And I actually need to grab a rubber spatula for my molasses. I would suggest measuring it directly into your pot, but of course, the magic of YouTube TV is I have to have a little bowl. So let's just get that all scraped out. Let's do not even half a teaspoon of salt for this 1/4 batch. If you don't want full-on straight molasses, you can do half molasses and half corn syrup, or half honey or agave, and it'll work out really well, and it'll give you a lighter, more gentle butterscotch. All right, and now that everything is melted in nicely, the butter and everything, it's all kind of come together, and so it is sugar soup. It is a liquid caramel. It'll still be a little crunchy though. I'm going to raise my heat up to medium. And actually I may do just a little bit over, like medium, high, so like a 6 on the 10 scale. And bring it to a boil. And once it's at a boil, I'm going to start letting it just go. I am not going to stir it very much. It'll just be every now and then, just to make sure nothing's sticking, nothing's burning. There's so much butter in this that it shouldn't have too much of an issue there. All right, we are at a boil. And I have a candy thermometer And what we're looking for on here is 250 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 130 C. You're welcome. I'm already at 230, 237, 240. Since this is a small batch, it goes very, very fast. Yours, if you do the full batch, will take longer. And I'm at 250. Let it go for a moment longer in the pan. That way it sets up a tiny, tiny bit firmer. Probably get it up to 255. And we're just going to pour it in. And yes, I have already oiled my parchment. And as you can see, the color on this is fairly substantially dark. Yum. That's why blackstrap is not always the most suggested. And if you saw, since I'm doing just a quarter batch, that only took 2, maybe 3 minutes after it came to a boil. That's how quickly this will cook. Because it is just pure sugar and fat, it carries heat really quickly and it holds it a long time. There we go. I would say taste it, but you're tempting a lot of fate. Oh my gosh, yummy. That's so good. Now, we're just going to let this sit in here for a second. Well, not a second. We're going to let this sit in here and just set up. I am sprinkling a little salt over the top just for that extra oof, because salted butterscotch is amazing. And we're going to let it sit in here until it's just a little over room temperature, so maybe 20, 30 minutes, depending. And once it is, I'm going to score it with a knife. So I will take a knife and I will get a little bit of oil on it, and I'm just going to score my little pieces. I'm going to make little cubes. And then I'm going to pop it in the fridge and let it come down to completely cold, and then finish cutting the butterscotch apart with the same oiled knife. And once we're getting ready to cut it, I will be back with y'all. See you soon. Okay, y'all, so the butterscotch has completely chilled. Let's just get it out of our pan, which, since we lined it with parchment, is fairly easy. And it's also going to make cutting it pretty easy, because then we don't have to worry about it sticking to our cutting board. Now, I let it cool at room temperature for about half an hour or so until it was warm to the touch, but not hot. And then I went ahead and put it in the fridge for about 20 minutes. And then, just to make sure it was easy enough to really break apart into pieces, I put it in the freezer for about 5 minutes, just to give it an extra chance. But before I put it in to cool, I went ahead and took a knife. I took this out of the pan, left it on the parchment, and if you can see, I scored it with my knife. And so I just cut it into 16 blocks across. So cut it in half, 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 and then halves. And then I did 8 across this way. That way it's little butterscotch morsels. And we're going to try to get it to break apart in those sizes. Some of them may not have been scored deep enough. So it may just turn into little toffee shards for us, which is perfectly fine because it's going into blondies. I only needed a little bit. That's why I only made a quarter batch, because I don't need this stuff sitting around my house. That's dangerous, because I'll eat it, because I love fresh butterscotch. So I'm going to go through, break this all apart. See y'all back in just a second. So it is cut. The reason I had the butter over here earlier is just in case I needed to run my knife through it while cutting it, just to keep the edge oiled, but it turned out just fine. They were still a little bit on the colder side, so they were snapping apart, which worked really well, but they quickly thawed out, and so toward the end they were still chewy and cutting really nicely at the sections that I marked off. So I get little squares like this. That is a happy place moment, let me tell you. Wow, so sweet, but not overly sweet because of the salt from the butter and things like that. It's amazing. These are perfect little chewy candies. These will need to be stored in the fridge. They can stay in there for 1 or 2 weeks. Hopefully they won't last that long. Again, this is only a quarter batch. If you make a larger batch, you can freeze them and keep them ready in the freezer for months, and they'll be perfectly fine. But there you go, homemade butterscotch. The next video is going to be making butterscotch blondies. So be sure to join me in the next episode of the Bare Necessities. Until I see y'all again, play with your food, have fun, make candy, and I'll see you later. Bye.